Hey everyone, thanks for checking out Grubstakers, the podcast about billionaires. This week we bend our own rules a little and ask the question, what's the deal with Jerry Seinfeld? Is he the king of comedy? Was his Netflix specials worth the amount that he was paid for? Why did he date that girl that was 17 when he wasn't? All that and more this week on Grubstakers.
I think we disproportionately stop whites too much.
I taught those kids lessons on product development and marketing, and they taught me what it was like growing up feeling targeted for your race.
I am proud to be gay. I am proud to be a Republican.
You know, I went to a tough school in Queens that they used to beat up the little Jewish boys.
You know, I love having the support of real billionaires.
All right.
In 5, 4, 3, 2.
Hello, and welcome to Grubstakers, the podcast about nothing but billionaires. Sean P. McCarthy here, joined by
Andy Palmer,
Yogi Pollywall,
Steve Jeffers.
And so this week, we're breaking our rules a little bit because we're doing an episode about Jerry Seinfeld. And as of 2018, Jerry Seinfeld's net worth, he's not quite a billionaire. It's been estimated he's worth between $860 and $920 million. He has a fleet of Porsches, at least like 20. He's got like a garage in Santa Monica and a garage in New York where he keeps his Porsches. The everyman observational comedian. But the thing is, the reason we are doing an episode about Jerry Seinfeld is we are just tired of eating our vegetables on this podcast. We have done so many episodes about hedge fund and private equity guys where you have to spend 6 hours figuring out what they do, another 6 hours why it's evil, another 6 hours trying to explain it to people why it's evil.
All for free, by the way.
Yes.
We're not charging you for this research, so it'd be nice if you gave us some money from time to time. I mean, what's the deal with free podcasts?
But Jerry Seinfeld, when explaining it's evil, why he's evil, all you have to do is say comedians in cars getting coffee. And it's much easier for us, and we just needed a break, so we're doing Jerry Seinfeld. And it should be noted, you know, his net worth between $860 and $920 million. Given this typical 7% return on capital, he's going to be a billionaire within 2 or 3 years, even if he doesn't do anything.
This is our first Asterix episode.
Right. So we will re-release this episode in 2 or 3 years as soon as Jerry Seinfeld is a confirmed billionaire.
Is this what's happening?
But so basically, there's so much to say about Jerry Seinfeld, and you know, Andy, Yogi, and myself are stand-up comedian, so obviously Seinfeld has been in one way or another influential, or at least relevant in our lives, let's say. And so this...
Who can forget this classic?
Who is shaving on the plane? And shaving so much, they're using up razor blades?
That was a edgy pre-9/11 airplane humor.
Yeah. It was like a month before 9/11 airplane humor.
Airplane humor died after 9/11, guys. It's really sad.
I know.
I can never forget those bits.
Jerry Seinfeld gave Muhammad Atta the idea to use airplane razor blades.
They have the weapons on the plane.
Comedy's dangerous, people. You never know who's... But anyway, look, the point is, this episode is about 3 unsuccessful comedians trying to find any excuse to present their animosity towards Jerry Seinfeld as based on anything other than professional jealousy. And I think we can all agree on that.
But also, we're not just doing a fun one because we're burnt out of the world of sadness. And
though that is also true.
But also, Andy, I think you'd like to share some thoughts on the world today?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I thought that, you know, it was with the death of war hero, Senator Maverick, John McCain, who always put country above party.
Right.
We were just absolutely depressed, and we just needed someone to lighten things up. So we could have a nice giggle about how he...
But I don't want to be a pirate!
He doesn't want to be a pirate.
I was watching the Mariners play the Arizona Diamondbacks yesterday, and they announced during the baseball game that John McCain had passed, and they're like, oh, he's watching the team from heaven now. And they were also telling this anecdote, I guess, because I was watching the Arizona broadcast about how McCain had, like, come and like sat in with them on the booth during some thing, and he like knew all the prospects better than they did. I'm like, oh, that's what he was doing instead of his job.
Yeah. Glad to know McCain's better at judging baseball than he is wars.
I do like that the Mariners honored John McCain by defeating his team 4-3 in solidarity with every election and war that he's been involved in.
If John McCain's in heaven, that's the longest he's managed to remain airborne.
Yeah, fuck you, Arizona.
Yeah. All right. Well, but setting aside our edgy John McCain humor, let's focus on another friend of Israel, Mr. Jerry Seinfeld.
Yeah. Now that all the moderates have been alienated, here's a Wii music version of the Seinfeld theme.
All right, so Jerry Seinfeld, and we'll kind of go, as usual, loosely chronological. Jerry Seinfeld was born in 1954 in Brooklyn, New York, and he, most of my research for this episode is based on a biography. It's called Seinfeld, The Making of an American Icon by Jerry Oppenheimer. It's a pretty good book if you're interested in Jerry Seinfeld. It's got a lot of dirt. The prose is, 3 out of 5. But...
And it's Jerry on Jerry.
But I like the name Oppenheimer because it's like we knew an Oppenheimer who studied giant bombs. And now this one's studying the post-Seinfeld, the TV show career of Jerry Seinfeld.
His bomb.
Yeah.
It is funny that like...
a bomb almost on the scale of Trinity.
At least 10 to 15% of that book is just like TV critics and newspaper writers being like, I just don't find Jerry Seinfeld that funny.
Right. It's kind of like if you look at critiques at like Dilbert right now, it's like, now that guy's outright completely, that comic wasn't ever that good.
But so Jerry Seinfeld was born Brooklyn, New York, 1954. The story of his father is actually pretty fascinating. I'll just cover it briefly. His father was named Calman Seinfeld. And so Jerry Seinfeld's grandfather, paternal grandfather, was a fishmonger who basically abandoned the family during the Great Depression. So Calman Seinfeld was like a hustler and a salesperson, and he had to like figure out how to survive during the Great Depression. Apparently he like learned how to fix car engines by the age of 13. So he like, hustled as a mechanic, and then he was, selling towels in the early 40s to, hotels and businesses.
Right.
He gets drafted. Calman Seinfeld goes to the Pacific. He's like a mail orderly in the Pacific. And then he comes back in 1945 from the war. He's doing door-to-door sales in the 1950s, like shingles and encyclopedias. Apparently, he was also selling fake holy water from like lords. Like, because I guess Calman Seinfeld, like he looked like he was, Irish or Italian or something. So he would go out to Long Island and sell to these, Christians this fake holy water.
Wow.
Like these little mini grottos with like the Virgin Mary, and he would say it's like real holy water. So you can, it was basically the inspiration for a Mr. George Lincoln Rockwell.
He used to beat up the little Jewish boys. Very, very common New York Jewish upbringing.
But Calman Seinfeld, he's doing door-to-door sales in the 50s. He meets Jerry Seinfeld's mother, Betty, in 1950. She was a bookkeeper and a seamstress. And then they are able, because of a VA loan, they buy their first house in Massapequa, Long Island, and they moved there when Jerry was 14 months old. They were like living in an apartment in Borough Park, Brooklyn. That's where Jerry was born. And then when Jerry's like 14 months, they move out to Massapequa, Long Island. So Jerry had kind of a typical suburbia 1950s, 1960s Americana existence.
Right. Aren't his parents both orphans as well?
Yeah, because like his mom is like the child of Syrian Jews, and her mother died, and then her dad had a breakdown, so she got sent off to an orphanage, and then as we mentioned, Cal Seinfeld, his dad abandoned the family, and so he was kind of raised by his sisters partly. So yeah, they're both orphans basically. But yeah, so they grow up in suburbia, typical stuff. Jerry has joked that Massapequa, Long Island, is the Indian word for near the mall. So,
Chief, the spirits!
I want the audience to know that's not Hindi at all, so Seinfeld don't know dick.
I think he means American Indian. Whatever case.
Wait, Andy, could you play... Wait. Could you play Jerry Seinfeld on David Letterman reacting to his Massapequa near the mall joke?
Stop laughing. It's not funny.
But so Jerry, like, an interesting thing from this book is Jerry was like into sneakers at like 6 years old. He would like demand his like mom buy him sneakers. And if you're familiar with Jerry Seinfeld, it's like, that's like, besides Porsches, that's kind of the big purchase he makes is just closets full of sneakers.
He's a child. He's a grown man child.
Exactly. But so he grows up. His parents are kind of lower middle class initially, but his dad, Kalman Seinfeld, he eventually settles on the hustle of selling signs to businesses. You know, Seinfeld Signs is what it was called.
Sure.
So Kalman Seinfeld is making, you know, a middle class living by the 60s, just selling signs to businesses. They moved to Harbor Green in Long Island in 1962. And just interesting story is that the mob boss Carlo Gambino was their neighbor.
What?
Yeah. It was just like a couple things from the book that caught my eye was just like Kalman Seinfeld used to like go over to Carlo Gambino's place and like play cards and poker with the mobsters.
Really? That's nuts.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess then again, at that time, being like near the mob, whether it's the restaurant or a business or your neighbor, wasn't that big of a deal, huh?
Yeah, and like from the Jerry Oppenheimer book, Cal boasted to friends that every time Carlo Gambino saw Jerry Seinfeld, he'd pinch his cheek and say, "You're being a good boy now, Jerry, aren't you?" and give him a new silver dollar. And also it's alleged that Carlo Gambino wrote a fat check to Jerry Seinfeld for his bar mitzvah.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So just like, you know...
blood money going into the Seinfeld name. Yeah, I see what's going on here. A common theme with the Seinfeld success story.
Later on, when a thing called Netflix developed, they remember my son and my nephew.
Right. That's true. Carlo Gambino and Seinfeld are both stars of Netflix now. I like the idea of Carlo Gambino on his deathbed being like, I hope I didn't create a monster. But so typical suburbia Long Island existence. Jerry was bullied a little bit, partly for being Jewish. He was at least once called a dirty Jew by the other kids.
Is Carl Icahn?
He was beat up a couple times at least. But he was like, so he was his first job was like a Newsweek bicycle delivery boy. And he starts Massapequa High School in 1968. And the way Jerry Oppenheimer says it is like he was really interested in both cars and Bill Cosby. Mm-hmm. And so as we mentioned, yeah, he listened to all the Bill Cosby records. He watched, you know, comedians like John Meter on Ed Sullivan, and this is where he kind of got the interest in it. And so it's interesting where you look at like Seinfeld in like the late 60s, early 70s. Like we said, he starts high school in 68. 4 years later, he's off at college. 3 years later. He's off at college, and he was very apolitical at a pretty political time in American history. And it is interesting where it's like his dad, Kalman Seinfeld, was kind of a Republican, but it seemed like the way Jerry Oppenheimer presented it, not so much for political reasons as just the fact that Long Island was controlled by Republicans, so he would like sell signs to various Republican candidates and like get in good with them. So it seems like Jerry Seinfeld was raised in a generally Republican household and was apolitical for the simple fact that all of his friends were being like, you know, stop the war machine and all that, and he was just like, I'm just not going to say anything about this. Right.
I mean, hey, whoever's going to buy the most signs, I mean, that's really the side I'm on.
We all made mistakes when we were teenagers.
But so he has kind of an uneventful high school. He says he hated it, didn't have that many friends. But in summer of 1971, this is between his junior and senior year of high school, he does a summer trip to Israel in 71. And there have been allegations that this is where he lost his virginity and this kind of stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But, you know.
That's where he popped his cherry?
He went with another comedian, didn't he?
Yes. Yeah, it was like, that was like one of his early girlfriends. I think his second girlfriend or something was like another future comedian. But so
We
basically.
actually have this audio from him going on his birthright.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy, I can't sleep, I can't leave the house, I'm here, I'm climbing the walls. Meanwhile, I'm dating a virgin, I'm in this contest, something's gotta give.
And that's when he learned to hate Palestinians.
But so Jerry, he talked about this. So he worked on a kibbutz, like the communal farm on stolen land. He worked on the kibbutz, and Jerry Seinfeld said, "I didn't like the kibbutz. Nice Jewish boys from Long Island don't like to get up at 6 a.m. to pick bananas. All summer long, I was working for ways to avoid work." And this is where he meets,
You know what else little Jewish boys don't like?
What's that?
Getting beat up in the schoolyard.
But so...
You know what else they don't like?
Yeah.
But I don't want to be a pirate.
Being pirates.
Being pirates.
But so... Jerry Seinfeld would later tell Playboy that he lost his virginity around 19 or 20, but it's been alleged, like, his first girlfriend said that Jerry told her that he'd lost his virginity on this kibbutz, and so, look, there's a lot of speculation about when Jerry Seinfeld finally had sex.
I'm pretty sure that the latter is probably true, and the former is just him bragging to a girl.
Yeah, that's his, she goes to a different school. I lost my virginity on my kibbutz,
Yeah.
This was his birthright before birthright.
Yeah.
When did Jerry Seinfeld finally yada, yada, yada? But so, besides that, it's uneventful. He hates high school. He wants to get out. So he's able to, a year early, goes to the State University of New York at Oswego. So he heads out there. He's remembered as a sensitive kid in college. His college girlfriend was like a heavy pot and Marlboro smoker and stuff. So Jerry did actually smoke a little bit of pot in college, but he wasn't heavy into it like some of them.
Like Obama.
Yes. And just like one of the interesting stories from the Oppenheimer book is, I'm just going to quote it here. Early on during one of the couple's many tiffs, fights, Jerry became so emotional that he ran with tears in his eyes down to the school library, where he was discovered sitting on a first-floor window ledge. He was seen balled up and crying like a rhesus monkey. He was sitting right in the window in the frame of the library, right in the center of everything, and it went on for a while.
What type of racial slur is rhesus monkey? What is that?
He was just crying in the middle of the library for like a long time, basically.
I mean, that
sounds like Carl Icahn is the one describing this.
I mean, honestly, there's
he was down there crying like a little rhesus monkey.
Yeah, a little rhesus monkey. What are you gonna do?
No, I insist we bully Jerry Seinfeld for having emotions on this podcast. But yeah, I mean, look, it's just and so the way
it's the most endearing thing I've heard about Jerry Seinfeld.
Is
that he was sad about a fight.
So sensitive.
All right, we'll have to cut this because it makes Jerry Seinfeld look too good. But that's he would later go on to date people at the age that he was when he went to college.
Right.
I think that's a little high.
But so, and just returning to the pot thing. So Jerry, according to the Oppenheimer book, Jerry was a control freak and a very controlled person. He wasn't quite as anxious to get high as his girlfriend.
What's the deal with space?
He'd be fine with it, the laughing, the sex, the eating, but I just don't think he enjoyed it all the time. I don't think he really liked it, and I don't remember him having any pot of his own, And so that was kind of Jerry Seinfeld's experience with drugs.
He's been noted as a minimalist throughout his life. Whether it's his first place in Manhattan, people talk about he just had a mattress on the ground and some books. So he's been outside of his massive collection of shoes
and Porsches.
And Porsches, he seemed to appreciate not owning many things. For a man that's almost a billionaire, strange.
Yeah, I mean that's the other thing. It's just why do you need all this money, Jerry Seinfeld?
Right.
And I know I have a self-interest in saying this, but he could just fund the entire generation of comedians.
Yeah, it is crazy how a good chunk of the issues plaguing comedy right now could be solved with a % of Jerry Seinfeld's net worth.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, Seinfeld, we'll get back to this, but he's paid $20 million a piece for his Netflix specials, which I would love to see the numbers on how many people watch more than 5 minutes of that. Oh, you mean he's doing jokes he wrote in the 1980s?
Right. Yeah, the entire special is just his act from then that he rehashed for now. And I mean, it is a bit of not behind the scenes, but just a sort of like, hey, this is who I was, which is not terrible, but it's almost very anti-Jerry. He's the most, you don't even know anything about my life, I'm just going to tell jokes about some random silly shit. So the fact that he's like, well, I grew up in this town, and I started at this comedy club, it's like, we don't need this, Jerry. We don't give a fuck.
I like the idea of somebody like putting on that Netflix special, and he's like, you know, when you're like trying to meet up with a friend and you are late and you can't call them. So what's the deal with Reagan breaking this air traffic controller strike, huh?
I mean, it's hard enough to fly.
In like Talking Funny, they talk about a joke he did, like one of the early late night sets he has about a roller coaster in like the ghetto, basically.
I was just looking for that. Yeah.
But he does that joke in the Netflix special.
Wait, really?
Yeah. So a bit that they're talking about, like, hey, remember that great old bit you had, is a part of the jokes he sold for $20 million. So, I mean, his dad sold fake holy water, and he's selling fake jokes at this point. So, I mean, what are you going to do?
But so he's, you know, he has this college. He does a media studies degree. He eventually transfers to Queens College because he wants to be in New York City because, you know, he's always had this interest in stand-up comedy, and he wants to be in New York, understandably. So he transfers to Queens College. He does various media stuff. He gets this degree in media studies, and it is the day after he graduates, or no, the night of his graduation, he does his first comedy set. He does the open mic at Catch a Rising Star and bombs. You know, completely unlike a real good comedian like me, who just did it fine from the beginning. But so he bombs, and then it takes him like a couple months, but then he goes back and he starts doing, you know, regular sets at these various bars around town, or around New York City. And it's interesting because he has a couple of odd jobs at first. He was like he was a waiter. He was selling street jewelry. It was one of
really?
like, yeah, it was one of those like very New York jobs where he would like set up you know, like a table in Manhattan and like peddle jewelry to people until the cops would come and tell him to fuck off, you know. So he was doing that, and then this is also where
he was doing the old dad hustle.
Yeah, I mean, he was exactly doing that. And then this is where one of the other odd jobs that gets under-talked about, but it's in the Jerry Oppenheimer book, is that he was doing a boiler room scam where him and his friends pretended to be Vietnam War veterans.
Whoa. Seinfeld has stolen valor? Is a part of his bio? That's hilarious. What's the deal with the trenches?
There were Charlies in the trees.
So basically, it's his friend.
My best friend died in my arms for nothing.
What's the deal with Agent Orange? I mean, does this guy know James Bond or something?
What is all along the watchtower?
Oh, the humanity. The horror.
And I'm telling you for the last time.
And then he said, me lie, and I was like, no, we all lie.
Well, you heard it here last, folks.
They say the U.S. Marines are raping people, and I say they're not people.
Palmer did music.
Oh my god. All right, so
they say shooting out of a helicopter is hard. I thought it was pretty easy once you close your eyes.
They said it was Operation Speedy Express, but when we shot 500 people a week from a helicopter, they didn't run that fast.
I wasn't into pot in college, but heroin overseas?
McNamara, is this the new McDonald's burger? All right. Oh, my God. All right. Well, so basically, his friend, I believe his name was Mike Costanza, and they would have a falling out later. But so Mike Costanza says the boiler room scam this way. Quote, "We used to scam people. To us, it was just a game, just a joke. Jerry was Dave Wilson, I was Mike Davis, and we'd sell light bulbs over the phone. Jerry and I came up with a bit about not having any hands, losing them in the war. We'd see how much we could make each other laugh and see who could floor the other guy using the most outrageous scenarios." And so they would say, like, one scenario was they would, like, call... cold call people from like this lighting company, and they would say, like, they would give their names and say, "We're the handicapped Vietnam veterans with the lighting company." Then one of them would drop the phone on the floor, step on it like 10 times, pick it up and bang it against the desk, and say, "Mr. Cohen, are you still there? You know it's hard to get used to these hooks, but I have 2 cases of light bulbs for you." And, they'd be laughing and like...
God, if I ever meet Seinfeld, I'd go, "Hi, Mr. Seinfeld. I'm David Wilson here. I'm a Vietnam War veteran. I just don't want to know if you wanted some light bulbs."
But yeah, so this was basically like a boiler room light bulb selling scam. It was illegal, obviously.
But not the worst bit.
Pretty bad.
Yeah, well. And
this isn't that far off from the precarious position of young people today.
Yeah.
It's like... It would be some TaskRabbit bullshit instead.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, we can compare that. Seinfeld, essentially, he was doing, these odd jobs, including a boiler room scam. And then what happens is he's hitting the open mics and stuff. And early on in either 1976 or 77, so this is only a year or two into his comedy start, the comic strip, which still exists today in New York City, hires him as the house MC. They pay him $35 a night at 23 years old, and this allows him to quit his day job and pursue comedy full-time. And just if you're wondering about the modern economy of stand-up comedy, $35 a night to MC is $35 more than you will receive at Laughs in Seattle for an entire weekend of MCing gigs.
That $35 dries up, guys.
Yeah.
Comedy boom's over.
But so, and he has help. He gets an apartment in the city at 23. He's originally living with his parents in Long Island and then commuting into the city to do these stand-up gigs.
What year is that he's making $35?
Either 76 or 77.
So that's like $130 today. If you had it for inflation and stuff.
It is funny that, club pay has not scaled up at all.
No.
It is exactly the same.
I got $7 last night for doing 7 minutes. $1 a minute isn't a pay.
We need to fact check this inflation.
Man, there's been some terrible deflation in the
Yeah, seriously.
But so, he's able to quit his day job because of this $35 a night. And then from the 76 to 1980, he's just kind of running around New York, just doing spots and actually making, a lower middle class living just off doing that, essentially. Though it should be noted that his dad did help him get the apartment because he was living in Long Island, commuted to the city. Then around 23, he gets his first apartment in New York City on the Upper West Side, which he would keep for a long time because it was rent controlled.
It's you pretty much were right. It's $141.
Adjusted for inflation. Jesus Christ.
$141 in 2018 dollars.
Oh man.
Man, imagine making $140 a night doing stand up.
That's fucking nuts.
Yeah, I could.
Yeah.
That's
think about all the food I could buy.
That's pretty good, actually.
that's a real amount of money that I'm like, wow, you could really have a career. It's sad hearing that number makes me be like, wow, comedy could be really fruitful and valuable outside of enjoying it and it being the love of my life. $140 a night, I really could do some damage with that. If you told me I could make $140 sucking dick a night, I'd be like, I'll consider it if I'm that broke.
But instead, you just do comedy and suck dick at it.
Right.
But yeah, no, it is interesting. And we've talked a bit about, Seinfeld, $900-some million net worth. And it's it's just interesting where he will lecture or speak to whatever younger comedians. And it's well, we have a completely different economy than what you had. And it's I don't expect the guy to fucking pay bills for other comics, but I think as far as charitable givings, like if he's interested in the art form, that is something he can do, because I know a ton of hilarious comedians who are struggling financially. And, you know, I have a decent 9-to-5, I'm fine, but like I know a lot of just the funniest people in the world, and they might never get the chance to be Jerry Seinfeld because they're just like living on fucking $50 a week, if that.
I mean,
you know?
it's crazy there's not a club Seinfeld owns. Like, when you really think about it, like, it's not necessarily a, you know, money loss or money made scheme. It's literally just, hey, Seinfeld, do you want a place you could do as much time as you want whenever you want? I mean, to be fair, he can do that anywhere in the city, but also he could be making profit on that.
Well, it's like one of the funniest comedians that we know had like a Conan special. I think he's had 2, and he was renting a couch from Yogi to sleep on in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment.
Yeah.
Like,
so, like, I mean, the economy.
So he was on television.
Right.
What's the deal with downward mobility? How do you get one in?
We'll get to this in a second, but yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, and this has kind of been discussed ad nauseum in comedy, but Jerry Seinfeld makes his Johnny Carson debut in 1981. A spot on Johnny Carson was worth $5,000 a week.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so that's how much he was making after he did his Carson appearance. He was making $5,000 for a weekend, you know? So it's just like, and again, that...
Jeffries, what's the inflation on that?
Yeah, I know, in the 81. But so, anyways, the point of this podcast is...
Basically, you can buy one of those new towers on Park Avenue without money.
Right.
But to continue... Jerry Seinfeld is making $35 a night emceeing at the comic strip. Between 76 and 1980, he's running around the city doing like 6 spots a night, getting decent spot pay. And sometime before
there was spot pay too.
Yes, it's probably the same as it is today, but he was probably getting like
today
25.
There's not spot pay.
Well, at the clubs in
at
Manhattan,
the good
there
clubs,
is. Yeah, there is spot pay.
You have to be a dual threat MC / dick sucker in order to make that money.
But so in the late 70s, sometimes in the late 70s, when he's emceeing at the comic strip, Rodney Dangerfield comes in, and Rodney Dangerfield sees Jerry Seinfeld, and he gives him his television debut, putting him on an HBO showcase. But really what happens for Jerry is he's actually able to start kind of touring even by the late 70s.
Right.
Because, like, again, talk about the changing economy and all this, but there's a comedy boom with the death of disco, where a lot of disco clubs became comedy clubs.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, like, they would have, like, the fucking disco light and all that stuff.
Right.
And then because they couldn't make any money on disco anymore, they just take it all down and put a microphone on the stage and say, oh, it's a comedy club now. So there was, like, a real kind of boom economy. So in the late 70s, Seinfeld's already touring. And actually by 79, apparently one of Johnny Carson's people had seen him out somewhere and wanted him to do the Carson show, but Jerry was very nervous about bombing on Carson because it was considered so career defining.
Sure.
And this is all what happens when there are 3 networks.
Right.
There are 3 options on your television. So he actually delays doing Johnny Carson. But he's actually making a decent living touring in the late 70s already. And then again, this is only like 4 years into comedy. But he decides in 19...
Oh, just like us.
Coming up on 11 years of no spot pay, or minimal if at all.
You've been doing it longer than 11, Sean.
Yeah,
I've been doing it 10.
I'm probably like closer to 12 or 13. I do love how I'm just like... I'm about to turn the age at which Jerry Seinfeld was probably worth $500,000.
Right.
Well, there's a Facebook post. I can't remember who it was, but it was really good, which was like, I didn't expect to be a millionaire 10 years in, but I was hoping to at least make $30,000 a year.
Pipe dreams.
But so in 1980, Jerry Seinfeld decides to seek his fortune in L.A., and he actually, interestingly enough, keeps his rent-controlled NYC apartment. And again, I'm bringing up the VA loan and the rent control and stuff just because I know people have this obsession
Wait,
with...
you got a VA loan?
His dad bought a house with a VA loan.
Oh, okay.
That would be funny if he used his fucking his hook hands bullshit.
Sorry, it's so hard to talk on the phone.
No, I can't come in to do the paperwork in person. Have you seen the movie Born on the 4th of July? I'm in a wheelchair. That's me. But so...
What's the deal with you guys being bitches?
How many babies did they make you kill? I bet you didn't kill any babies.
But I don't want to be a swift boat veteran. But so he moves to LA in 1980, but he keeps this rent-controlled New York apartment and he sublets it to his friend, and he keeps that apartment into like the 90s or something. I don't know exactly when he gets rid of it, but he keeps it a long time. And I'm just bringing up the rent control and the VA loan and the dad loan and stuff just because it's like a lot of these self-made myths are just that. You know, there's always a helping hand either from the government or from Friends and Family LLC or whatever, you know. So it's like Jerry Seinfeld is probably the richest person to ever make their money doing stand-up comedy, and you still see this kind of benevolent forces helping him along the way that are not always available to people today.
Like Larry David was living in artists' housing on like 23rd Street in Manhattan. And it was subsidized housing for artists, if you can imagine that today. And
yeah, it's called Bushwick.
Without the subsidy.
Subsidized by their parents?
Yeah, it's subsidized by the fucking Carlyle Group Trust Fund. Subsidized by training the Saudi Arabian mercenaries who murder their populace when they act up.
And it's like that apartment now has to be worth like at least $1 million baseline. Just like the one-bedroom apartment where Kenny Kramer. I don't think Kenny Kramer can afford to live there anymore.
No, he's still there. He can't afford to live there, but he's still there.
I was thinking once we started recording, like, oh man, we probably could have gotten Kenny Kramer for this episode.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like he kept leaving and coming back to the podcast, though.
The biggest thing I remember
He'd eat all your food.
About Kenny Kramer is, and we'll talk about the Michael Richards things a little bit, but basically, when the Michael Richards thing happened, Kenny Kramer put a statement online saying, "The real Kramer does not endorse racism or discrimination of any kind."
Said some pretty nasty things to some Afro-Americans.
You know, you have to respect the comedic timing that went into the apology.
Oh yeah.
Stop laughing. It's not funny.
Stop laughing. It's not funny.
It's the review of B-Movie. But so in 1980, Jerry Seinfeld makes the move to LA. This is after doing comedy about 4 years in New York City, doing 6 spots a night or so, making decent money, and also touring a fair amount by the late 70s. So 1980, he moves. He gets a bit part in a sitcom called Benson, where I guess they signed him to be on for the whole season, and then they dropped him, I think, after an episode or two, but they'd signed him for $40,000. Again, $40,000, 1980. So he was signed for this bit part in Benson. They fired him, but he still gets paid out $40,000. So he's doing fine by this point. But 1980, he moves to LA.
It's like the going price for a mansion.
He struggles a little bit, but then in the sense that his first 6 months, he's feeling like nobody's putting him up or whatever. He does the improv for spot pay. But
he's not getting up. He's got $40,000 from a sitcom, but he's not getting up.
Continues to get the mythical spot pay.
Yeah.
People talk about the grind of Seinfeld. You know, he really put in the work.
Yeah.
He worked real hard with his $40,000 that he didn't have to do much for.
He read a script for. But so he had this 40 grand. He's able to subsidize himself with this. But in 1981, he makes his Johnny Carson debut. He's called back, I think, 2 months later. And then a few months after that, he's called back again. And by this time, 81 and throughout the 80s, he's a road warrior. As we mentioned, he was being paid $5,000 a week, typically, after his Johnny Carson appearance in 1981. And he's like, him and Jay Leno were kind of the two...
top dogs.
As Adam Carolla would put it, they rode it hard. They did the road hard. They were doing like 300 gigs a year or something like that, or high 200s. So he's actually like making hundreds of thousands of dollars in the 1980s just off stand-up comedy.
They spread the word about America, about what is the deal with, have you seen this, have you heard about this?
And by the way, Seinfeld has talked about during this era, he knew comics that would tour the country with like a good 10 minutes. So the era stand-up, when it comes to like what this era meant, is not the, Louis C.K. new hour every year type of thing. It's he's doing his act. Mm-hmm. And his act is the same act that you will see on his Netflix special released 2017.
And so, yeah.
He really grinds.
Apparently, he would like do daily yoga exercises on the road.
Yeah, he's a big proponent of yoga and meditation.
Right.
He talks about this a lot.
Yeah, and and he writes about how he like wrote every day and stuff. And yeah, I'm sure he worked hard at stand up and. But it should be noted that he was very fortunate as far as timing in the comedy boom, where he was making so much money that I believe in 85 or 86, he hired an accountant who ripped him off for 50 grand.
Oh, wow.
And because he was like just storing his money under the mattress.
Sure.
And his girlfriend had to like convince him to fucking get a Merrill Lynch account and later an accountant.
Right. His 14-year-old girlfriend.
No,
you should get a Merrill Lynch account.
Adjusted for inflation, she was 23. But so, yeah, he's making hundreds of thousands of dollars by the 1980s. In 87, he's profiled in Time magazine. He has his first solo HBO special in the same year. And by 1988...
Which he did for exposure.
Exposure and drink tickets. Don't forget the drink tickets.
Yeah. He actually crowdfunded to get that HBO special.
But yeah, so he's making like 100+ grand at this point in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. That's crazy.
Yeah. And just like random things from this era, his father sadly passes away in 85. Obviously that's very emotional for Jerry. And he is engaged to a woman in 1984.
Is there a video of that eulogy?
And apparently it exists. I mean, it's somebody in the book describes it as like obviously the most emotional they'd ever seen Jerry, but kind of off-putting because he's such like a not emotional person, off-putting that he was like grieving his dead dad.
Oh, Jerry, that's a bad look for you.
What's the deal with crying?
That's why he left Scientology. They were like, this is an unacceptable expression.
He wouldn't be able
here.
to finish his joke. He'd be like, what?
Yeah, what's the Scientology thing?
So the Scientology thing, as far as the book describes it, is that he gets into it in the 80s.
What, Judaism wasn't good enough for him?
Right. So he tells his girlfriend, his like longtime girlfriend, and some of his friends that in the mid 80s that he was involved in the church, and then I'm quoting from the Jerry Oppenheimer book. He was what was known as a quote pre-clear, a person who was not yet clear, a person learning more about himself and life. As a pre-clear, he said he was involved in a form of personal counseling called auditing, one-on-one sessions with a Scientology minister known as an auditor. And it uses, and for those not familiar, auditing uses processes, questions, or directions given by the auditor to the pre-clear to help him find out things about himself and improve his condition and free himself from what the Scientologists claim are unwanted barriers that inhibit, stop, or blunt natural abilities.
Are you remembering something that gives you great pain? Yeah, why are soda cans so hard to open? You can't get the table!
There was Charlie everywhere, man. We called down napalm on my own position.
The Seinfeld voice is like very... Jewish PTSD member. Like, it's just, I don't understand what's going on.
We called it napalm because it burned their palms. But so, and it's like, it's kind of weird where like he's involved in the mid 80s, and then journalists kind of started to ask him.
I hate flying Delta because it reminds me of the Mekong Delta.
We're going to have a warning at the beginning of this episode.
But so, journalists started to ask him about this in the early 90s because Scientology was already controversial then, and of course the Seinfeld show had blown up.
Wait, I want to do a second shot at that joke.
Yeah.
I thought the Mekong Delta was bad. Then I started flying Delta Airlines.
So do you want me to cut the other one?
Yeah. Or just leave both in. I'm just going to do it again.
Great.
So journalists started asking him about Scientology in the early 90s, and he told a Playboy interview in 1990, he said Scientology taught him, in a sense, how to handle hecklers better. It gave him those communication skills. And I like the idea that Scientology taught him to handle hecklers better by teaching him how to kidnap them, destroy their lives, and cut them off from their families. But at least as late as 1992, he was like defending Scientology in interviews, and he was always kind of like downplaying it, where he would say, I'm paraphrasing, but he would say things like, yeah, I kind of like take a grab bag from different religions where like I got into Zen and meditation, but I also learned about, this kind of stuff about myself from Scientology, and I just kind of like took what I liked from each, little religion or following or whatever.
Death is the only truth.
I used to be bothered by hecklers, but then Scientology taught me about disconnection. That's why I don't love my family, and I only care about my money.
I do like the idea that it wasn't his act, it was his Scientology that made him blow up.
Right.
He'll never get on a DC-9 again.
It does make sense, though, that he might have been financially struggling if he was in Scientology all this time.
Do you guys know about like the Scientology when you want to move like to one of the higher levels, they take you out on their yacht? You guys know about this?
Oh yeah, the seasteading.
Yeah. So like it's this like yacht that they take out to international waters, and essentially, you've put in hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they want you to put in more money at this point. And rightfully, a person might be on the fence about this, but when you're in international waters, surrounded by people forcing you to go take the next step, you'll probably take the next step. And I don't advocate pirates, but I would love for pirates to attack the Scientology yacht. Yes,
Seahorn.
They kidnap Jerry, and they're like, say the line.
But I don't want to be a pirate.
I am captain now. Do you know that was started so that L. Ron Hubbard could avoid his tax fraud?
Oh, God.
I didn't know that.
Charges.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So in 1988, he's made some 30 appearances on Johnny Carson and David Letterman, and this is where NBC essentially gives him... They tell him, do almost whatever you want,
sure,
and we'll put it on TV as a show. And so he's like, he meets up with Larry David, and they kind of come up with this idea. Like, the story is they were like doing a set at Catch a Rising Star, and then they went and they like started riffing in a deli afterwards. And Larry David was like, "This is what the show should be: just comedians, figuring out how they get their bits or whatever." Right. And so,
he also, Jerry Seinfeld also prides himself on being one of the few people that could be on Carson and Letterman during that period.
Oh, so, that's interesting.
Yeah.
He, back before political correctness ruined that for him. And just one other thing. His longtime girlfriend from the mid-'80s to the early 90s before they finally broke up, he broke up with her essentially because she wasn't Jewish.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it's like a weird thing where the way the biographer says it is that his mother, Jerry Seinfeld's mother, was very clear to him that it's like, never marry a girl who's not Jewish, and even a girl who converts to Judaism, it's not okay. And it's just one of those things where it's like, I mean, that's racism.
Yeah.
Nobody ever calls the Jewish faith on that, because especially when you're talking about like not even a convert to Judaism, that is just racial discrimination.
Yeah, but that's something that this country is known for, where it's like, speak English. They're never talking about Hebrew. You know what I mean? Like, it's a very clear-cut thing where the bigotry that the Jewish community holds is not ever under question in this country.
Mm-hmm.
It must have been really confusing for his first girlfriend when she first met his parents and then met them a second time, and it was a completely different pair of old people.
Yeah, he like fired the guy who played his dad on, I think, the pilot because Jerry didn't like the job he was doing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they completely replaced him.
Yeah. But yes.
I didn't get that bit. That's very funny.
The story of Jewish racism is why Andy is an unmarried man today. But yeah, so he told his girlfriend, quote, "I will never marry someone who's not Jewish." And of course, he would eventually go on to marry and have children with a Jewish woman. And I don't have anything to say about it except it's just kind of this weird form of racism we've all decided to tolerate.
By we, Sean means the whites.
Yes. You get a pass in it in fucking white liberal circles to just be like, I will only date someone of my race. Right. No, it's okay, I'm Jewish.
Yeah, it's kind of it's acceptable to say I will only date someone who is the same religion as me. And so it's kind of
but they can't convert. They have to be the racial religion.
Right. It's kind of a backdoor to like.
All right. Well, none of you are running for office.
No, it's fucked up, and I mean, it's fucking stupid. Like, I mean, if I told you, like, oh yeah, my parents won't let me marry someone that's not Indian and Hindu, you'd be like, that's stupid. But yet, the moment we change
we'd be like, Yogi, you clearly do much better with white girls.
And the ones that tolerate me.
But so 88, NBC picks up the Seinfeld television show. Its first 3 seasons. This has been talked about to death, but we'll just kind of go through it briefly. It kind of survives on essentially the ratings itself aren't that good, but they do very well in a high-income demographic.
Yeah, he talks about this on Howard Stern, actually. Yeah. Stern is like, oh, your numbers were down earlier. You probably would be canceled these days. And Jerry Seinfeld, very confident, is like, nah, our demographic was high-income, so we were fine. Very confident. He's like, nah, fuck you, Howard.
Mm-hmm. That is definitely different than what they said in the old, DVD mini-documentaries that I watched, where they'd be like, we just have a very loyal audience. Yeah. And so we knew we'd be able to, stick through it.
No, they got the NPR crowd. If you want to talk about the stereotypical liberal NPR crowd, that is the demographic that they got. That NBC was like, well, they're gonna buy the merch, so who gives a fuck what they like?
Yeah. The advertisers want the rich.
So you got
people
the Frasier people.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, certainly.
All right, so continuing on Seinfeld, the first 3 seasons, they're doing okay, but they're performing fine among the high income demographic. But it is the 4th and the 5th season where Seinfeld really becomes such a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah, they get moved from Wednesday, I think, to Thursday. So
yeah. Oh, yeah, and they have Cheers as a lead-in, so they're doing much better. And, I think, I'm not sure your guys' opinion on Seinfeld. I think it's a hilarious show. I think Larry David probably deserves the lion's share of the credit, but I'm not going to say Seinfeld didn't contribute a lot to the show. Yeah, it is his fucking show.
Some of you may be asking, if you're doing Jerry Seinfeld and he's worth less than $1 billion, are you going to bring out Larry David's dirty laundry? And to that, I say no other than sour grapes, which everyone's allowed a mistake artistically. Larry David's perfect. Go fuck yourself. I don't know why I'm being mean. No one has been mean to us.
There's a funny story.
Plenty of people have been mean to you, Andy.
Yeah, but no one listening to this.
That's fair.
There's a story in the Jerry Oppenheimer Seinfeld biography is that a comedian would meet Larry David, and so he came up to him after a set once, and he said, hey, good set. And Larry David just kind of looks at him like he's an alien and walks off. He comes up to him again. He's like, hey, great set again. Larry David just kind of looks at him and just says thanks and walks off. And then this same comedian comes up to him at a deli a third time, and he compliments his jokes, and Larry David's like, what's with this nice guy shit?
That's great.
Yeah, but we will spare the famously curmudgeonly Larry David. He's only worth about $500 million that he hoards for himself, and
he's openly curmudgeonly.
He should give the money away, but we're not going to break our rules and do a Larry David episode. Though we will be doing a Julia Louis-Dreyfus or Dreyfus family episode at some point.
They own all the sugar. How the fuck do they own all the sugar? Look into it. Literally, sugar grows only in brown countries. How is this white family owning all of it? Look into it.
It is true. The Dreyfus Company goes back to mid-1800s France, which was famous for their very fair trade deals with African nations, among others.
Afro-Americans.
Yes. That'd be funny. Julia Louise-Dreyfus has actually done more to hurt the African community than Michael Richards.
Probably true. Probably true.
You know, she's used the N-word more.
But Seinfeld is, by its 4th and 5th season, a big, huge hit. And it is in 1993 where Jerry Seinfeld gets his first bad press. And we've kind of alluded to this. But this is a weird fucking story, and it's been talked about a fair bit. But he starts dating a 17-year-old.
Yeah,
and,
it's fucked up.
He is a 38-year-old man at this point. And the only thing weirder than the actual story is how he met her. Is at least according to this this biography that I've been referencing, the story is that, and apparently this is the way Jerry Seinfeld told it, which I'm like, what the fuck? The story he tells is that himself and his friends were in Central Park taking pictures of attractive women. Which is like, that's the pre-Me Too era.
Yeah.
That's before political correctness ran amok.
And this is cell phones pre-cameras being on everyone's body. Like, this is literally two randos in the park going, let's just take photos of chicks, man.
Right. So, and it's
they're
like
38. They're not fucking in their 20s. They're 38 years old.
Yeah.
These are grown men.
And it's so weird because it's like he describes that as like a prank where they were like, he says they were going to show it to their other friend to make him jealous or something. And I'm like, that's not a very funny prank. That's not dropping the phone and pretending to be hook hands.
He's in season 3 or 4 of his show at this point.
I think it's 4 or 5.
He's like a bona fide television star.
Oh, yeah, he's
and
a
he's
star.
just taking photos of chicks in the park.
Yeah, because he has, at this point, he has like $1 million multi-million-dollar Central Park apartment.
Oh, my God.
And so he lives right next to Central Park. He still has a place next to Central Park on the Upper West Side.
Well, someone confronted him about that
serious things.
while he was taking the picture.
Campaign.
Yes.
What's wrong with the industry? I mean, are you asking yourself how come all of this is
It's not
coming?
the industry, honey. It's the whole gender. It's men and women.
You
This is
just
about
called-
men and women.
You just called me honey.
Yeah.
Well, in fairness, he would later tell Brian Williams, I'm on the autism spectrum.
He was just advertising for B-Movie.
Yeah. But so let's get back to the 17-year-old because we'll finish that story and then we'll move on to other such stuff. So basically, he is taking pictures of women in the park, and then he sees this 17-year-old girl, and he goes back to his apartment, and he's infatuated with the pictures, and then he goes back to the park. I think it was a later date, and he meets her again and introduces himself to her. And
I was taking photos in the park the other day, and I couldn't stop jerking off to these photos. I just wanted to know, do you like jazz?
He came up to her and was like, I lost the bet because of you. But
it seems like he copied season 1, episode 2, The Stakeout, 3 years after it came out.
Sure.
But so basically, he meets this girl, and again, as we've mentioned, he's a huge national celebrity at this point. Seinfeld is crushing it in the ratings. This is 1993, the height of his celebrity. So she's, I think she was an Upper East Side Jewish girl.
Aren't they all?
Her name was Shoshana Launstein, and she was, taken aback with him. And so this is April 1993. They meet, and then their relationship becomes public in May 29 of 93. He takes her to a Knicks game, and she's in the camera when he's interviewed or something, and he apparently that night called his publicist panicked because he knew that this story would break about him dating a 17-year-old.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh my God, is this illegal? What's going on? And they were worried about her parents suing him, but apparently her parents loved him, I guess, because he was multi-millionaire famous guy or whatever. But so, and it is interesting where it's like they talk a bit about the tabloid environment of the time because the first person to confront him on it was Howard Stern.
By the way, it's worth noting that on Shoshana Lonstein's Wikipedia page, for her professional years active, it's 1998 to present.
What?
In other words, her
right
years,
after the breakup?
Like several years, her years as a professional person are significantly after her relationship with Jerry Seinfeld.
Yeah. But
I want to circle back on one thing real quick, Sean, if that's okay.
Of course.
You asked like our opinions about the show Seinfeld, and it's a perfectly enjoyable show. I used to watch it with my dad, which is a nice personal memory. But let's be honest here. A general bunch of white people in New York, that's a TV recipe that just works.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it's Seinfeld, Friends, fucking Girls, I don't know, Sopranos, I mean, the list goes on. It's not that hard to make white people in New York pop on TV.
So you're saying we should fire you from the podcast. But so Howard Stern, it's just, I want to just quote this. Howard Stern confronts Jerry Seinfeld when he does a phone interview, and this is like the last time Jerry Seinfeld appears on the show till like the late 2000s, I think. And then Howard later does a song about Jerry's girl is only 17 or something like that. But so Howard asks him, so you sit in Central Park and have like a candy bar on a string and pull it when young girls come by? And Jerry was described by the book as barely controlled. And Jerry says, I am not, repeat, not a cradle snatcher. And then he lies, asserting firmly, she is not 17. That's all I'm going to say about it. Case closed.
Oh, my God.
She was, in fact, 17. But it's just kind of a weird thing where it's like, they date a little while until, I think, 1998. She goes to George Washington University. Like, she was in high school when they started dating.
Well, she needed a ride.
Yeah. She goes to George Washington University. Jerry visits her on campus at George Washington. Then later, she transfers the following year to UCLA so that she can be in LA, where Seinfeld is, of course, filming the show Seinfeld.
Aww.
He gets her an apartment in LA, and they continue their relationship for a...
he gets her an apartment in LA?
Actually, I can't confirm that, but she gets an apartment in LA. I assume Jerry helps her financially.
Sure.
I don't know. She comes from a rich family.
Yeah. And then just like one other random anecdote about that. Apparently they dated until 1997 and had an amicable breakup. But in 1996 they were shooting an episode of Seinfeld, and an audience member, it was, I think, a female, they were doing audience questions, essentially.
Right.
And a female fan from the Oppenheimer book, a female fan stood up and asked, what size cups does your girlfriend wear? Her question was met with an icy silence. Well, Jerry finally responded, we've suddenly taken a nasty turn here, haven't we? I don't think that's any of my business, much less yours. By the way, what size jock do you wear? Looks like a large to me.
Wait, he said that to her?
Yeah.
He said that to the audience member asking him what size bra does his girlfriend
so
wear
he
or
said
something.
he said she has a penis?
I guess so, yeah.
He's trying to say she's got a big old set of balls. How dare she ask Jerry this question? How dare she, a woman, ask Jerry a question on the anatomy of another woman?
And so we'll kind of jump around here as we're winding down, but just one other thing. Well, from when Jerry first started to become rich in the 1980s, his girlfriend at the time describes he would go on tour and like buy all new stuff for himself and then just throw it out when he got home.
Oh, really?
Instead of doing laundry. And she actually like got him to stop this because she would like take his stuff and like donate it to her father, brother, or just whoever. And she describes the story of like he bought like a brand new multi-$100 wallet, and he was disappointed because he had ordered it and he got it in brown instead of black like he liked, and he just threw it in the trash can. And she had to explain to him, are you insane? Go give it to a homeless person, but just don't throw it in the trash. And he said, quote, oh, you're right. I just didn't think about it. And yeah, you know, as Christopher Lash said, culture of narcissism. But yeah, I mean, it's just interesting where it's like an adult in the mid-1980s was like, oh, I just didn't think that instead of throwing things out, I can donate them.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think that it's very easy to think that, Seinfeld in his like 4th, 5th season is in his like late 20s or something. But he is a 40-year-old man at that point. And so all of this like infantile behavior, it's like, oh, well, Jerry's just kind of a loon, a young gun. It's like, no, that's an old man.
To go on, the show Seinfeld ends in 1998, and then there's a story of basically he breaks up with his 17-year-old girl, and he cucks another dude, and that would become his still today wife, with whom he has 3 children. It's just kind of an interesting story. The brief of it is that she's his current wife was married an extremely rich husband, but not quite rich enough.
Right.
And he got her a gym membership, which he would later regret because she met Jerry Seinfeld at the gym.
What?
And so the actual story is they get she meets Jerry Seinfeld before the actual wedding when she is engaged to this guy. They get married. They go on a 3-week honeymoon to Italy where he just like lets her spend all the money on whatever. But she cuts the honeymoon short to go back to New York, where she shacks up with Jerry, and I think 5 days later says, I'm breaking it off with you to get with Jerry Seinfeld.
What?
So, that is an alpha move.
Yeah. Yeah.
Say what you want about Jerry Seinfeld, but he did cuck a man pretty thoroughly.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
And that other man, his name was Michael Richardson.
Her name was Jessica
not
Sklar,
funny,
and it's quite the shame that we didn't get to find out what would be the comedy act of the Sklar brothers and one Sklar sister.
But so, just like one other random story, and then I just want to talk a bit about Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee and Netflix, and then we'll close out here. But so, Jerry Seinfeld dated a woman who was named Karen Green, who was a one-time flight attendant, but later she went to go on to be very involved in Texas Republican politics, and he did a fundraiser for her.
Oh, really?
And when I say Texas Republican politics, I mean the mass murder of George W. Bush. Apparently, she was running for a Republican Dallas County criminal court judge. Jerry Seinfeld in 1997 went out and did a fundraiser for her. It was like a 250 a person cocktail party where she raised $35,000. He came out and endorsed her. And so it should be noted that she had earlier worked for George W. Bush. She served as the executive director of Texas Criminal Justice Division of the Office of the Governor, a job that involved developing policy and overseeing legislation for Bush, including, of course, his horrifically pro-death penalty stance. And it's just interesting where she was an extremely conservative criminal court judge, and what she said about it was just that Green said Jerry was not a Republican and described him as really pretty apolitical, nothing at all. I'm the only person on the planet he would do this for. But she added that they did discuss judicial philosophies and noted, quote, he's very proud of my conservative philosophy and my approach, which is to strictly interpret the law, which I'm making the jerk-off motion right now, and work with integrity. He agrees with all of that. And, of course, interpreting the law for conservative judicial means inventing the idea that the First Amendment means bribery laws are illegal for corporate political speech. But it is just kind of like a random anecdote. I don't know what to do with it, but this...
well, that's why you brought it to Grubstakers.
Yeah. Well, apparently, according to this website that I had to access via the Wayback Machine... Mm-hmm. Seinfeld gave $1,000 to Al Gore in 2000 and $1,000 to George W. Bush in 2000.
This is what a guy who just can't figure out that he can donate to the homeless is doing with his money.
Right.
Well, I could just flush it down the toilet. But it is like...
to Wesley Clark and John Kerry.
It is like Seinfeld was the perfect show for the 90s because it was so apolitical and it fit into the whole end of history, there is no politics anymore kind of thing.
We're just selfish assholes, and that's how the way the world works.
Yeah.
But it's the 90s.
But so, before we wrap up here, I do just want to talk about Jerry Seinfeld in Netflix. We've kind of mentioned he got a $100 million deal with Netflix for 2 specials, plus Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. And he's being sued by the co-creator of Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. You read about that, Andy?
So apparently the co-creator of Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee pitched the idea to him back in 2002. And it at the time Seinfeld was pretty ambivalent about it. And then a little while later, I think it was after the failure of the marriage ref.
Oh yeah.
One of his crimes we don't have time to to address. Seinfeld said that
Seinfeld takes the guy aside backstage. He's like, "Have you thought about going younger?"
Apparently, his representatives just kept giving him shit because he didn't have anything going after the marriage ref.
Right.
Got completely shit canned. And so then he brought it up to this guy, last name Charles. He's not Larry Charles, though. Christian Charles. And he said, hey, let's do the idea about the Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee. And so Christian Charles made the pilot. He basically wrote it. He had a treatment for it already. So then he set everything up, got the locations and everything ready for the pilot. And apparently for the pilot, Seinfeld was just pissed off and didn't want to do it. And just really annoyed, and they had to kind of coax him to do it, and then he refused to do the voiceovers.
What?
And so...
I like how he's like Wesley Snipes on the set of Blade.
Which, if you've seen Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, the voiceovers are critical to the thing.
Yeah, it's mostly voiceovers on that show.
Yeah. And so they eventually, this guy sends it to Seinfeld, and Seinfeld and his people sit on it for a minute, and then they're like, "It's great," and decide to run it. And then they tell the guy basically "Oh, you're just a for-hire director." After the guy produced the whole first pilot, they're like, "You're just a director," and kind of cut him out and said that he billed them for creating the thing, and they're like, "Oh no, your only payment is your director's fee for whatever episodes you direct." And so then he filed a lawsuit now that it's on Netflix, and Seinfeld basically seems to agree that it's basically his people's argument is that it's just outside the statute of limitations. They can't do anything.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's comedians in cars stealing creative property. Yeah, and so
was the deal with being a powerful monster who can crush your enemies. There's another story in the Oppenheimer book. I think.
By the way, there's this line from the Hollywood Reporter. It says, "Defendant Comedians in Cars LLC."
Yeah, I mean, look, Jerry Seinfeld has benefited a lot from other people's work. Let's say that.
Yes.
And you know what? At least he made Larry David half a billionaire. But not the guy who thought up the idea of having rich assholes drive around and insult service industry people in coffee shops. But anyways, and then the other thing is just this was kind of a story this year was Jerry Seinfeld did some sort of a Israeli Defense Force training camp. I don't know the exact details of that. Steven, you looked at that a bit?
Yeah, it was like a fantasy camp for sort of defending Israeli settlements.
He goes there and starts having Vietnam flashbacks.
And if you look it up online, there's a picture of him posing next to an IDF soldier.
Yeah, that's the kind of famous
It looks
thing.
like the Sacha Baron Cohen,
right?
Mossad character.
Right. Well, because his dad was a big pro-Israel guy, and Jerry, of course, was very influenced by his dad. And as we mentioned, he went on this kibbutz, this trip to Israel in 1971, and he's very.
It's ancestrally our land.
What's the deal with the Israeli-Palestine conflict?
Yeah.
We have a right to defend ourselves.
There's no such thing as Palestinians. They were living in the country called Jordan. Okay. What's the deal with white phosphorus, anyone?
I just love the tone change in this.
Yeah, you know what? We're at an hour. It's winding down. But look, the point is here, Jerry Seinfeld is going to be the first person to become a billionaire from stand-up comedy, or more specifically from a television show. He's made at least $400 million just off residuals and such for the Seinfeld show. If
Cause is really a country, why can't anyone leave it?
It's the most successful sitcom of all time, I think we can say confidently. And Jerry Seinfeld, is an interesting person, and I think it's just like we mentioned the story about him not giving his possessions away and then just throwing them away, and it's like he's worth almost $1 billion. He doesn't spend on anything except for like sneakers and Porsches and the most basic. I guess it's different now that he has 3 children, but it's just like,
is it though? Is it different? I think he's mostly spending his money on sneakers and Porsches.
Yeah.
Just necessities.
And he's still and he's kind of like Leno, where he's got, the compulsive thing, and we're all stand-ups, we can sort of understand, but he still tours relentlessly. Forbes has him making like $57.5 million this year, and of course it's partly Netflix, but it's also just he's still selling out stand-up arenas, and there's still people paying to see him, and I got really nothing to say except for comedy is subjective, and I don't understand.
What's the deal with comedy? It's so subjective, yet I keep making money from it.
Well, like 8 years ago, Sean and I were hanging out in my apartment, and Seinfeld was on Letterman.
Oh my God, it was so bad.
It was so bad. It's to the point where I joked, like, you think Dave's going to call him over to the desk?
They bonded over their shared love of teenagers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it is just like something interesting where Jerry Seinfeld has like the most milquetoast act, but he's also complained about political correctness because he had some dumb joke about like when you're scrolling through your iPhone, you're like a gay French king. And some people got a little tense at that one, and he's like, it's the audience's fault. Yeah. But it's like, I don't know.
It's not that it's the worst joke anyone's written this year.
It's just interesting.
It actually was written in 86, so let's not forget that part. 86 it murdered, so just letting you know.
But it is just like, look, I've watched, Seinfeld stuff from like the 80s, and it's like, it's fine stand-up comedy, but it's, I think clearly becoming a billionaire who doesn't buy anything except, Mets box tickets or whatever the fuck, and, his having 2 garages worth of Porsches has probably detached him a bit from the average human experience. Right. And having a show where they just drive around and be rich together, You
can't be rich and funny unless you're Larry David.
I think that's what we learned.
That's the takeaway.
Yeah, and so rest in peace to John McCain, and we hope another Vietnam veteran, Jerry Seinfeld, will include more diversity on comedians in cars getting coffee.
We called in for help, but then the plane that was supposed to bomb the Charlies crashed.
What's the deal with war? It's nothing like MASH.
War? Huh? Good God, y'all. What is it good for? Absolutely nothing.
Say it again.
One other thing. As of 2002, when this unauthorized biography was published, he has not given any money to his father's synagogue for repairs.
What?
He also hasn't given any money to his high school. Understandably, he hated it. But it was just kind of interesting where it's like, we project he'll be a billionaire within 2 or 3 years, and his record of charitable contributions seems to support that thesis. Yeah. Because I don't think he's giving that money away.
No.
He bought Todd Berry a coffee. And then was very condescending where he was like, hey, you're doing great, aren't you? And Todd Berry just was like, you want to swap?
Every episode of Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, they have to edit out where the person gets really angry at him for giving him the bill. So let's go Dutch on this, right? Well, Jerry Seinfeld, billionaire within 2 or 3 years, reinvented the American comedy and provided a model that all of us are following and will continue to follow.
And with that, this has been Grubstakers. We got a new episode coming out next week. Thank you for listening. My name's Yogi Poywall.
I'm Andy Palmer.
Sean P. McCarthy.
Steve Jeffries.
Boom, 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 boom.